Thank you for coming, doctor. I honestly didn't think the renowned psychoanalyst, Jeffrey Gilland, would see me. Then again, it isn't every day you are handed the opportunity to interview an insane colleague. And I am your golden ticket to a more profound reputation, aren't I? Please, you don't need that arched brow to impress me. I've spent years trading theory and thesis with you, Jeffrey. Until you published your paper on paranoid delusionals, I thought I was the only one making any progress in schizophrenia research. But I see my banter is falling under speculative regard. Very well, let's begin with the reaffirmation of patient ID. My name is Professor Randall H. Courtney. I maintain doctorates in the fields of psychology, psychiatry, psychobiology, parapsychology, criminology, and religious mythology, the latter a particular passion of mine. Until recent events, I was the head of Western University's psychology department and special consultant to both Western Community Hospital and the state-funded Pleasant Glen Home for the Criminally Insane, specializing in sociopathic and schizophrenic cases. I am 57 years of age, moderately healthy, and unfortunately close to the precipice of insanity. Of course, you wouldn't be here if I were not. To the heart of the matter, as you would tell me when I began a long-winded diatribe. Here, then, are the circumstances which led you here. It all began 2 weeks ago. I had read the case study of the holiday hacker, William James Morton, by Dr. Lansing in Athens. His paper discussed the complete personality and symptomatic juxtaposition of Morton. By all accounts, William James Morton was a classic case of a violent sociopath. He murdered a documented 156 women and children from 1993 to 2013. Undeniably, Morton was the most prolific serial killer ever substantiated in his claims. Unlike our tail-chasing study of Henry Lee Lucas, as the typical profile of a serial murderer, Morton was a white male in his late 30s, middle-income class, with a social magnetism that allowed him to make friends easily. Coupled with an unusually high IQ, Morton was well liked by colleagues and friends who, of course, never suspected his nocturnal activities. Morton worked for the Indiana Public Utilities Commission as a meter reader. This gave him unlimited accessibility into his victims' homes, to which he would cleverly observe several potential targets for 2 to 3 weeks prior to making his move. All of Morton's victims were killed during holidays, most notably Christmas and Easter. Thematic juxtaposition of Morton. By all accounts, William James Morton was a classic case of a violent sociopath. He murdered a documented 156 women and children from 1993 to 2013. Undeniably, Morton was the most prolific serial killer ever substantiated in his claims. Unlike our tail-chasing study of Henry Lee Lucas, as the typical profile of a serial murderer, Morton was a white male in his late 30s, middle-income class, with a social magnetism that allowed him to make friends easily. Coupled with an unusually high IQ, Morton was well liked by colleagues and friends who, of course, never suspected his nocturnal activities. Morton worked for the Indiana Public Utilities Commission as a meter reader. This gave him unlimited accessibility into his victims' homes, to which he would cleverly observe several potential targets for 2 to 3 weeks prior to making his move. All of Morton's victims were killed during holidays, most notably Christmas and Easter. As you know, Dr. Lansing asserts Morton killed on holidays because his parents did not celebrate any of the accepted Christian holidays, and that either the indifference or non-participation of social interactions with friends and family created Morton's behavior. Unfortunately, Lansing never appropriately explored the aspect of his ritual abuse by his father or the sexual recriminations his mother heaped upon him. And let us not forget his classic disassociation with morality and accepted social behavior. I see you have no taste for debate tonight. Very well. Morton ritualistically entered the household of families wherein the father worked a third or graveyard shift between the hours of 1 to 4 a.m., and proceeded to slit the throats of his victims, from oldest to youngest. His signature was the destruction of a major holiday tradition, stripping a Christmas tree of ornaments, tearing up Easter baskets, shredding Valentine's Day cards, vandalizing the Thanksgiving centerpiece, etc. But you've already read Dr. Lansing's case study, Jeffrey? Of course you have. You know, on the night of December 24, 2013, the Jeffersonville police responded to a 911 call from a half-dead Iris Dennison. By the time they reported on scene, all 3 children, aged 3 to 7, were found dead in their bedrooms, as was Mrs. Dennison, still clutching the bedroom phone. Amongst the carnage and destruction, they found the 5'10" meter reader balled up in the corner of the living room, covered in his own bodily fluids and the blood of his victims. The police report concluded with Morton's overwhelming confession and sorrow. What followed was to be the largest admission of serial murder ever told. As a matter of fact, when they found Morton's infamous tome of the season, the grisly journal of his slayings, I wager Morton told them where to find that damnable book. For some unknown reason, this brutal, remorseless killing machine was now raving like a paranoid schizophrenic in a highly manic delusional state. Morton was now begging to be locked away for his crimes. This complete change portends an emotional 180-degree spin on all our known beliefs of mental illness. Curious, don't you agree, Dr. Gilland? I see you are still not impressed. Very well, let us move to the meat of the meal, the night of March 15th, the night Lansing and Morton died before my eyes. I must, however, warn you in good conscience, this tale will, no doubt, test the limits of your psyche. So, I must ask you to suspend your disbelief until the tale is told. I cannot guarantee you will ever sleep soundly again, but, you will know the unbelievable truth which has stolen my sanity and placed me here under guarded supervision. Before that fateful day, I had thoroughly studied Morton's tome with avid interest. As a long-range researcher, Morton's tome of the season provided an invaluable resource the likes of which had never been seen before nor, I must suppose, will ever be seen again. Can you imagine a reference book for homicidal sociopaths written by a homicidal sociopath? This was no notebook of ranting against the machine of society, nor was it an incoherent catalogue of instability. With an above-average IQ, Morton meticulously entered all thoughts, actions, and variables of each murder, down to any minute smell, taste, and touch he experienced. His view was frighteningly clinical, even his penmanship looked antiseptic, not obsessive. Words cannot express the terror of his analysis or the sheer horror of Morton's accurate observations on the death of his victims. Honestly, Morton's brilliance in notation and observation would shame the efforts of our most esteemed research colleagues. This was also the opinion expressed by Drive. Lansing. That is why he allowed me to study the tome as a precursor to meeting Morton. I believe the sheer immensity of the task at hand brought me into the fray. Perhaps it was the simple fact that Lansing needed an intellectual equal to back up his claims and save his reputation from the assertions he was about to make. Whatever the case, I should have politely denied him and continued my life in the blessed ignorance which will never again be mine. Here, then, are the events of March 15th. Dr. Lansing and I arrived at Pleasant Glen just before 6 p.m. We were both in good spirits, anxious about our first in-depth interview with the man the media had dubbed the holiday hacker. We had discussed the tome during the 2-hour ride from the airport, and had formulated a strategy for interrogation of William James Morton. However, the strategy disintegrated once we occupied the room with this killer. Morton was escorted into a room no bigger than the average living room, bound in a formidable straitjacket. His eyes were glassy, wide, darting, the epitome of a paranoid schizophrenic. He moved with shaky uncertainty, and, if not for the armed guard, would have certainly fallen into the table instead of being seated at it. Lansing put on his psychiatrist's hat and went to work. Good evening, William. My name is Dr. Lansing and this is Dr. Courtney. We've come to ask you a few questions. Would you mind? To this, Morton giggled and spat. Your dime. Fire away. We read your book, William, Lansing continued. Why did you write it? For posterity, head shrinker. It don't make no difference. Nothing does. He began giggling like a schoolboy with a secret. What do you mean by that? I piped in. I feel sorry for you assholes, I really do, Morton said, rocking gently in his chair. I'm gonna pay for what I did, but you don't have a clue what's gonna happen. Maybe if you explained it to myself and Dr. Courtney we might be able to. Save me? Morton cut in. I don't think so, head shrinker. Can't you smell the doom? Taste the fear? Is it because of all the people you've murdered? I asked. A sneer of righteousness crossed his lips. No, not 'cause of all the people I killed. Would you mind explaining what you mean? Said Lansing. You won't believe a word of it, but that don't matter. It's gonna happen whether you believe me or not. But, I ain't saying nothing till you turn off those recorders. Agreed? We heeded his request and turned off our recorders. He simply smiled at the two of us and his eyes seemed to clear and his demeanor altered. The armed guard behind Morton leaned against the wall as if holding it up, oblivious to the conversation. It was the last expedition I underwent, said Morton, the Dennison family experiment. I am still sorry I did not have the time to record my observations. I found myself utterly without words as I listened to this madman speak without the previous trace of his drawl. His new verbal diction was measured, reflective, almost nonplussed. It was then an answer dawned on me for his abrupt and distinctive attitude alteration. The mystery of his 180-degree turn could be logically, and anticlimatically, explained. I jotted DID into my notebook and sighed in profound disappointment to such an obvious solution which the psychiatric community used to call multiple personality disorder. So it was one of the Dennisons you regret killing? Asked Lansing, as if he didn't notice the change. Not for a moment. Morton's eyes sparkled. Apparently, you forgot to read your paper on my aberrant behavior. Lansing shuffled uncomfortably in his chair without response. I quickly jumped into the fray. What caused your radical behavioral change? Any idiot with half the imagination can fake paranoia, get more attention and stricter supervision by his captors. His voice was almost clinical in its approach. A sociopath is simply locked into a cell, fed and watered as required by law, and forgotten. I cannot, will not, be casually erased from existence. So you are perpetrating this ruse for attention? Scowled Dr. Lansing. For witnesses. Why would you need witnesses? I interjected. 'Cause Santa Claus is coming to town, Morton sang, in a sickly sweet child's voice. I don't understand, I said. I killed the jolly fat man, he said flatly. What? Lansing and I gasped in chorus. I butchered Kris Kringle, Old Man Winter, Saint Nick, whatever you choose to call it. What do you mean by it? I asked. Let me put it this way, Morton began. I could see his calm, controlled demeanor begin to crumble like a glass house from a stone's throw. I have killed a lot of people. I know what dead is. In all of my research, I have never seen anything like it. I might be a sociopath, but I am not insane. I know the direct effect of all my actions and am totally aware of every child and mother I put in the ground. But, I will not be stalked by a figment of ceremonial imagination. When it comes for me, I want others to tell the tale. I will not be dismissed as some raving lunatic and have my observations shelved as another madman's delusion. Enlighten us, Lansing asked, with a certain smugness. Morton leaned forward on the table, which caused the guard to lazily mutter, "Watch yourself, Morton. I'm only a step away from busting your ass." "I'm sure you are." Morton dismissed the man. It was Christmas Eve and I had just finished my experimentation on the children. By the way, did you know you can open a child's jugular vein when they are sleeping, and they will continue sleeping into death, cradled in the warmth of their pooling blood? That is, unless you make noise or your instrument is not sharp enough. Interesting, Lansing said, clearly uninterested. Thank you, Doctor. Morton's voice was less than gracious. I believe that was the moment he began to lose interest in Lansing's presence and spoke directly to me. As I was saying, I had just completed my study and was busy leaving my calling card. Defacing the Christmas decorations, I supplied. Yes, he nodded to me. It was during my ceremonial defacing of the tree when I heard a large thump, like a pot roast hitting the counter from 30 feet. Pot roast? Yes, kind of a meaty plop. He looked directly in my eyes. I could tell the story was an attempt to reaffirm his tentative grip on what he considered reality. I turned around, expecting to find one of my victims in the survival category of willpower over wounding. Only 10% do, you know. Interesting theory, Lansing offered, trying to re-establish his role in the conversation. Could you offer more on this aspect? No. Morton dismissed Lansing and continued. I turned to find a fat man in a red and white suit. Yes, he was covered in ashes and soot. Yes, he had a big, round belly, shaking like a bowl full of jelly. All the stereotypes were accurate. Santa Claus? The name escaped my mouth in reserved disbelief. In all his wonder, Morton's eyes began shifting to the barred window and back to me. The fat abomination started to laugh like life was all hearts and flowers, and all the holidays I never had were in the past and meant to be forgotten. He had the audacity to glorify a celebration that the Christians stole from the pagans, and capitalists stole from God himself. So, I planted my scalpel in his chubby throat. What? My shock could not be contained. I knifed him, he said, with a cool, triumphant smile, and he had the nerve to spit out through the blood, "You were being naughty." He pulled the scalpel out and picked me up off my feet and said, "Santa doesn't like naughty little boys and girls." That tub of lard tossed me across the room like a rag doll. I remained silent. I had nothing to say to his unbelievable tale. You probably guessed that, irritated me. He tried to shrug off the rest of the story, but it flowed from his lips like bitter wine. The first thing that came to hand was the Christmas tree stand, which lay discarded among the remnants of light strands and broken bulbs. I used the stand to split its head open like an overripe melon. By the time I was finished, its head was a bloody bowl of red oatmeal. But, it tried to get up. Can you imagine my surprise and frustration? No, I can't, I responded. Well, this was no experience a clinical man like myself was prepared to anticipate. I improvised, knocked it to the floor, severed its head from its body and got myself together to leave. Unfortunately, Santa had wasted valuable escape time. I was trapped. My mind tried to figure out what to do next. That's when I heard a bloody gurgle behind me. Santa was on his feet, wagging a finger at me. He stopped for a moment to regain his composure. And, do you know what that bloated corpse said? What? Droned Lansing. I'll be back, you bad little boy, it said, and then popped up the chimney and jingled off into the night. And this is your explanation for your abrupt change in behavior? Lansing scoffed. I can smell fish stories from miles away. Do you truly think I will report this hogwash? I don't care what you do, you academic leech, Morton growled. Why didn't the police see Santa fleeing the scene? Wouldn't they have been tipped off by Rudolph's nose lighting the way? Lansing taunted. Morton turned to me, his eyes intense and focused. I just needed a fellow colleague to listen and to know. I am surprised I have not been assassinated by now. I have spent too many nights wondering when my end will come. Now, it doesn't matter if it comes for me. The story has been told. That is all. Indeed, sniffed Lansing. I have never heard such. Lansing trailed off, cocking his head like a collie to a dog whistle. Do you hear bells? At this point, Jeffrey, reality crumbled. It was almost as if the terror was waiting for its cue to take the stage. The sweet sound of bells grew louder and louder as a red light from outside the window drew closer. Oh, shit, it found me. It seemed Morton's persona switched again and struggled within his bonds. "Let me out of this jacket, God damn it." The outer wall of the interview room exploded noiselessly into the dark night, collapsing as if hit with a great, silent force from inside the room. The dust swirled about the gaping maw as 3 of the 4 of us stood frozen in place. "It found me." Morton shrieked as he pushed off his chair and tried to make himself small behind the interview table. The guard broke from deep lethargy and pulled his gun. "Freeze, you son of a bitch." He pointed the shaking weapon toward the hole in the wall. From a sleek, red, levitating sleigh, 2 smallish men, roughly 3 feet tall, with pointed shoes and ears to match, grinned maniacally and quickly disembarked. The obscene jingling of their droopy, conical hats mocked the viciousness of their body language. They stood like doormen at the sides of the missing wall, leering wildly at the bewildered foursome. "Which one?" called one of the little men in a shrill soprano. We all held fast in pure horror as it stepped through the hole. It wore the suit of Santa and bounded from the sleigh with a jolly stride. All the myths were true except for Santa's head. It was more an assembly of leftover parts from a slaughterhouse than a head with a pristine red hat. It looked like roadkill which had boiled on the unforgiving black asphalt for days. Jagged bone protruded from shredded, pulpy muscle, as a dark-stained beard revealed a ruptured orifice which could only be the mouth. It rasped in a voice of sandpaper and pain which pierced my very soul. "Naughty." It pointed a gloved finger at the hiding serial killer. The men in green, elves I would presume, advanced on Morton, glaring. "Am I invisible?" The guard barked, drawing back the hammer of his .40 caliber pistol. "Now back the fuck up." I won't say it again. Faster than the mind could comprehend, one of the elves was upon him. Eyes wide with disbelief, the guard watched as the little man tore into his flesh like a rabid wolverine. The guard, I believe Carl was his name, found himself caught in the middle of an eruption of blood. His blood. Carl had the horrifying honor of watching himself being autopsied while still alive. His last memory was of his entrails sliding from his chest cavity and slapping the floor. He quickly collapsed to the gray-flecked institutional tile, cocked gun still in hand. Finally, Lansing reacted. He vomited, spewing God's name between each hasty exit of the day's meal. The 2 elves pounced on Morton, hauling him to his feet amidst his tearful protests. The elves clamped around his bound arms like a metal vice grip. This only increased Morton's shrieking. And what, you may ask, was I doing during all this? Nothing. No, that is not true. I was trying to escape to the part of the mind we psychologists claim comatose patients go when severely traumatized by life. My little place must have been closed for repairs, for I was forced to witness the hideous events that continued before my previously agnostic eyes. Morton continued sobbing and rocked in his straitjacket. Lansing continued vomiting and taking the Lord's name in vain, and I became a statue as the corrupted thing in the red suit advanced upon his elf book-ended victim. The thing's head contorted in an expression which most likely was a smile amongst the shredded muscles of its face. It lifted Morton's tear-stained face with a gloved finger as if examining a slave soon to be auctioned. "No, please, no. I'll be a good boy," Morton pleaded to mutilated ears. The elves giggled knowingly. "No, please, no. I'll be a good boy," Morton pleaded to mutilated ears. The elves giggled knowingly. As if it were not surrealistic enough, Lansing came under control and tried asserting himself as the voice of reason. "Can you imagine, Jeffrey?" The old fool tried to rationalize with mythical characters in our unfathomable situation. I could smell death upon him even before he managed to spew his initial salvo of psychobabble. The elves released the whimpering Morton and focused on Dr. Lansing. Their movements would have shamed the best bodyguard or Secret Service agent as they swarmed Lansing. "This situation has not become unsalvageable," Lansing said, smiling at the 3-foot gremlins. "Perhaps we can avoid any further unpleasantness if we can allow ourselves a moment of reflection?" One of the elves came face to face with Lansing, listening to his words with a contemplative face. The first elf nodded agreeably and said in that squeaky soprano, "No." With the stealth of shadows, the second elf neatly penetrated Lansing's back with a petite, clawed hand. The intrusion must have granted Lansing a form of anesthetic shock, for his face was less comprised of pain than of surprise. Whatever the case, Lansing fell to his knees immediately as I watched the demonic second elf playing tug-o-war with Lansing's spinal column while the first elf continued to lock his gaze onto Lansing as if milking the suffering from the psychologist's eyes. The tug-o-war was being lost, until the second elf put a foot on the doctor's back and wrapped its fist around the exposed section of his spine. Effort redoubled, Lansing's spine popped loudly then slid from his body with a wet, sucking sound. The little monsters briefly considered Lansing's wide-eyed death mask, cackled gleefully and went back to their original target, ignoring my useless presence. Maybe it was the dismissal of me as a harmless entity that awakened me. Vanity has always been a great motivator in our profession. It was as if the magical inner button had been switched off, for my senses returned. I was wrapped in raging anger for the first time in my life, and it was my assertion that these abominations of nature needed to be brought to justice. At least, I prefer to think my motives were purely altruistic instead of triggered through selfish preservation. My first thought was of my need for a weapon. I then remembered the guard's unfired gun. I mustered my courage and walked slowly toward Carl's mutilated body and my only salvation. They continued to ignore me, preferring to get the pleading Morton under control. I retrieved the heavy weapon without incident. Until that day, the thought of firing a weapon repulsed me, yet I was beyond the point of moral justification. My clinical world was at an end, and I was determined to survive the brave new world into which I had been so unceremoniously thrust. The unreality that was the three interlopers blanketed the sobbing Morton. "Naughty," repeated the abhorrent Santa, as his mitten-clothed hands reached for the pristine red hat on its mutilated head. "Naughty," I quietly mumbled. Actually, I believe I giggled as I said it. It was that giggle which alerted the elves. Both of the little green monsters spun on their heels and faced me like a western showdown. I did not mix hyperbole, I simply pulled the trigger. The gun roared, catching one of the elves in its slender neck. In fact, the .40 bullet nearly severed the elf's head. It sputtered some ancient gibberish and fell to the ground, twitching. Unfortunately, the remaining elf was quickly upon me, rather, upon my leg. It lashed out with its savage claws, removing my patella with near surgical precision, as if it were an old-fashioned bottle cap. Pain exploded across my being, yet this was not the time to recognize my shortcomings. I fell backwards and struck the unforgiving institution floor. I scarcely had the opportunity to blink before the little creature was upon my chest, set to strike the killing blow. "Dead!" it shrieked, raising a gore-soaked talon. Yes, I smiled. I almost experienced a moment of pity for the little elf as it felt the gun barrel dig into its crotch. Almost. At close range, the bullet shredded through the elf, throwing its lithe body across the room. Believe me when I say this, Jeffrey, if I were you, I would be wearing the same disbelieving expression. Sometimes, in the silence of night, I, myself, have cause to doubt all that occurred in that antiseptic room at Pleasant Glen. Yet I cannot escape the conclusion. In the immortal words of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, when you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. Here, then, is the most improbable fate of William James Morton. I struggled to my feet, the table a proper crutch to my shattered leg. Though it seemed like an eternity, I had dispatched Santa's helpers in a matter of seconds. I, unfortunately, did not miss the horror unfolding between Morton and the shredded Santa. Excluding the appearance of its head, the scene played out innocently. The obese dead thing removed the hat. To this, the straight-jacketed Morton bellowed and squirmed like a worm on a hook. Santa calmly placed the hat upon Morton's head and chuckled, "Ho, ho, ho." Never had I heard a cry of such torment and terror as I heard that day, nor do I ever wish to hear it again. My blood ran cold as the holiday hacker, bound and helpless, called to a god he never believed in while the abhorrent creature offered a grotesque, gurgling chuckle. I raised my weapon, not knowing what I could do against his terrified screams. "Kill me." Morton's eyes locked to mine. "Kill me before it's too late." I leveled the gun at his head. The corpse Santa made no motion to stop me. "Please, please, please," Morton cried. "I can feel it. Hurry." I swallowed hard and squeezed the trigger. To this day, I do not know if I was too late or if the bullet would have had any effect had I delivered it sooner. Needless to say, I placed a bullet hole neatly in the middle of Morton's forehead. The bullet hole puckered, diminished and sealed the flesh of his forehead as the manic terror in Morton's eyes swelled. The metamorphosis had begun. Before my eyes, the smallish frame of William James Morton expanded. Along with growing girth, his facial features softened, losing the terrified sociopath in puffy cheeks. His face erupted in white tufts hair, with the hair upon his head lengthening in a shocking snowy white. His restraints melted into a thick red blouse with matching pants as bare feet became shod in shiny black boots. During this transformation, the thing that was Santa deflated like a balloon slowly losing air. When it hit the cold floor, Morton rose to his feet. No, it was no longer William James Morton. "Ho, ho, ho," it roared, jelly belly and all. As if on cue to this battle cry, the dead elves exploded, showering the room in large, cottony snowflakes. It was at this point my mind decided it had truly seen enough. I fell to the floor and began laughing as I tried to catch a snowflake or two upon my proffered tongue. I wondered to myself how many I could catch before I bled to death. The new Santa looked at me for a moment and patted me on the head. "Now you be a good little boy." He offered a wink, thumbed his nose, and through the blasted portal he rose. Once through the hole in the wall, the crumbled bricks reformed and jumped back into place, resealing the room as if the intrusion never happened. My memories pick up in the hospital as an attending doctor told me I would most likely never walk again. I remember my comment being slightly sarcastic, but I cannot remember what I said. It really does not matter at this point. So, Jeffrey, am I insane? Oh, don't look at me that way. I know, Only an insane person could create such a fantastic world to play a scenario such as this. If only the evidence did not exist to the contrary, eh? The psychiatric community will play it off as an extreme psychotic episode from a man who has worked too closely to his subjects. The local law enforcement, unwilling to advertise multiple grisly homicides, will be more than happy to agree and quietly close the case. However, before I'm escorted back to my padded room, consider this: we, as a society, look to insane explanations to rationalize those topics which we personally do not wish to breach. Babies come from a benevolent stork, whether balloons cross the globe as UFOs, the Son of God relieves the weight of personal sin by ritualistic torture and eventual death. In this pantheon, my greatest fear is reserved for a creature that keeps track of our morals, rewarding or punishing us for being nice or naughty. A beast that preys only upon the most innocent of our culture, children. A being which, despite the security alarms and fences, is allowed to enter our house and is given unrestricted access to our inner sanctum. We do not question his valor or mission, we simply expect this modern icon to perform in a righteous manner. But, I must ask, what if this creature is not here for our mythical amusement? What if, like the old wives' tales of cats who steal children's sleeping breath, old Saint Nick has an ulterior, sinister motive? You know, Jeffrey, the suicide rate for Christmas is staggeringly higher than any other time of the year. Coincidence? Have we, in fact, unleashed a terror into our normal lives that sustains itself with supernatural malfeasance? Now, more than ever, I remain skeptical. No matter, I believe I shall never leave this place. I have seen too much and perhaps said too much. My advice to you, dear Jeffrey? You better watch out, you better not cry, you better not pout, I'm telling you why. Santa Claus is coming to town. Emily, Stan and I enjoyed our grandmother's tales. During school breaks, Mom and Dad drove the three of us to her home in Plimerton. It was a small coastal village, an hour's drive north of Wellington. Everything about the place was tiny. It was simple. There were 3 cafes. There was a floral shop and a small dairy shop that served fish and chips on warm Saturdays. On each journey to our grandmother's home, the 3 of us glued our faces against the car windows. We watched as the tall dark looming shapes of the sawmills were replaced with empty flatlands. The rush of salt to our nostrils replaced the sawdust that rained constantly over our heads. The green sky followed us, though, whether it was in Wellington or Plimerton, the sky was there to remind us. It wanted to tell us the truth that each and every one of us will turn to wood when we die. That was fine. The stories that our grandmother enjoyed telling us pictured a time before the curse of a wooden death struck every inhabitant of New Zealand's capital, Wellington. She told tales of strong winds that battered the city. We craned our little heads at each painting that decorated her walls. She had even shown a photo of herself as a young girl walking with 2 legs. By her storytelling days, however, our grandmother couldn't even move of her chair. It was depressing. Who wanted to see their family member degrade into an immobile husk? Her condition was worse every visit. Grandmother's lower waist had been transformed into a thick bark. Her arms hung heavy on her sides. Her legs seemed to merge, even fuse, with the wooden floor of her home. Even her voice had started to sound croaky, like 2 boards rubbing together. Her condition grew worse each visit. Every time Mom and Dad told us that we were heading home, I wished, I hoped, and I prayed that we would get another chance to see our beloved grandmother. Emily, Stan and I wanted to see more pictures. We wanted to listen to more tales of a Wellington long past. For Emily, she wanted to hear about the lifestyle. My brother, Stan, was fascinated with the landscape. I, for one, was curious about the museum, Te Papa. The Te Papa Museum was a wonderland, my grandmother described. She said that every day, different people from around the country and the world filled the museum to the brink. It was impossible to walk inside without bumping into 5 or a dozen people. Some days, she said, it was best to stand still and let the crowd guide you to your destination. The reason was simple: there was a lot to take in. Once a person stepped inside the museum, they were bound to be lost. Whether it was the natural exhibition on the 2nd floor, New Zealand history on the 3rd floor, or the Maori culture on the 4th floor, one simply could not walk around without stopping. My grandmother said that she could feel her pupils racing back and forth inside her eyes. Each pupil wanted to take in as much information that the museum provided. It was a giant building filled with laughter, joy, awe and a great sense of local pride. I wished so badly to see what my grandmother had seen. The Te Papa that existed today was no more than an extravagant mausoleum. Its corners were sharp. Decapitated wooden heads of the museum curators looked down from the building's large wooden doors. The creamy brown paint that had once decorated the facade had been replaced with the wooden bodies of people. Each one was strung up against the others like dolls. It was disgusting. It was a mockery of the beauty that had once been. Before my grandmother died, she had told us that she had forbidden herself from visiting the city. There was no point ever going back since the curse of the wooden death appeared. It would have simply made her depressed. Wellington was a husk of its former self. The current city was nowhere near like the beautiful windswept paradise of grandmother's stories. She had wished that one day, the three of us would be alive to see Wellington in its glory days. Yet, even back then, I knew that the chances were already stacked against us. The side of my neck had already started to harden. The skin of my brother's back felt thick like bark. As for Emily, my youngest sister, I still cannot believe that she passed away. I remember the last I saw her. It was on a cold autumn night in May, a few days before her death. Emily and I went for drinks in the Old Harbor and Sea Bar in Lambton Key. It was a celebration. Emily had gotten a position as a receptionist for one of the largest sawmills in Wellington, a 200-meter tall behemoth at the center of the city. The pay was very good. Her hours were reasonable. She even got the option to take 3 weeks worth of paid leave per year. I wasn't sure how Emily had managed to get the job. She had only completed a bachelor's degree in accounting and had a few temporary jobs at various call centers. Had she impressed a top dog from the sawmills? Had one of her friends given a good word to someone in the company? Or was it all just plain luck? Whatever the case, Emily would be paid nearly as much as my position as a secretary for the city council. She should have been proud and excited. The Emily I knew could have yelled out to every person in the bar that she had secured a big gig. I was surprised, almost worried, to watch her lean down against the bar table. A half-empty cup spun in her hands. I never really enjoyed the thought of arranging people's wooden remains to be sent to the sawmills, she confessed. I jugged a glass. I hiccuped. You can always give the position to me. I'd do anything to avoid crossing paths with that pig of a counselor, Jonathan Wales. And let you have my pay. She slammed her palm on my back. Yeah. Nah, sis, I'm keeping it. Thank you very much. Just because I hate the kind of work I must do doesn't mean I hate the pay. Plus, I heard that my table was crafted from the body of an all-black. My option still stands. Working for the city council will be great. I hiccuped again. The bartender with a wooden jaw passed me 2 glasses of water. Emily raised her cup. The bartender answered with another pour. It is transitional anyway.
Once I save enough money, I'll buy a huge property near Plimerton, and set up a business where instead of chopping people up, we can make them I don't know, human trees?
You're just trying to live like grandma, eh? That's so cute, I said, drinking my glass. Her house is still standing if you want it. Yeah, but no, Emily said with a smile as I caught a few guys staring idling at both of us from the far corner. You were always her favorite, I said, patting her shoulder. It had been 20 years since Grandma passed away. Emily was only 6 when Mom and Dad brought the 3 of us to the nearest sawmill to watch our dear Grandma be sawed and hacked to pieces. I guessed I get why Grandmother exiled herself, she said, gulping her glass in one go. It is too depressing. I don't want to spend time in this city here any longer. I don't want to see mangled corpses in the middle of the streets. I don't want to watch them hauled onto the back of trucks or chopped up as firewood. You can always, try being a model, I said as I hiccuped. You know, to cheer people up. Emily tilted her head. I was being serious there. I insisted. You can start by not being so gloomy all of the time. Emily, come on, cheer up. You'll start a new job next year. You'll be rich in an instant. We can plan the celebration party now, if you want. Let's leave all these problems for the future. Emmy, we have enough trouble as it is without thinking that we're going to end up as furniture. Plus, you still haven't had any physical trace of bark in you yet. So, you're saying that actually should become a model. She pushed her hair behind her ear. Am I really that, well, sexy? The same guys from the corner glanced down at her soft, fleshy long legs. Emily giggled, raising a glass up her head. I hadn't realized that I was drop-dead attractive. Everyone, I apologize for looking so sexy. Maybe it was my looks that gave me a position as a receptionist for a major sawmill. Emily. I groaned. She sat, head lowered, and cheeks puffed in pink. Sorry, sis. Ego got the better of me. If it makes you happy, you're still my favorite sibling. You're not a dickhead like Stan. God, I hate our brother's guts. He thinks he is so great and mighty. I almost wanted to feel sorry when I heard that his back is turning to wood. Almost. It's everyone's burden. I called the bartender for another round. Seriously, just for once, I just want to know who or what did Wellington fuck up so badly that it left us with this stupid curse. She muttered and let a lock of her blonde hair to fall over her face. Grandmother said that the god of the wind was defeated by the god of the forest. That's why everyone is turning to trees, I replied. That's why everyone is turning into trees. I wish it was that simple, Emily said. How do you kill off the god of the forest anyway? Wellington was better off when it was scorched with 100-kilometer winds. Like in the old days, you know. I sipped my glass, nodding. You're really not taking me seriously, eh, Natalie? Emily elbowed my shoulder. Anyway, after one more drink, I'll call it a night. You were right, we have enough shit to worry about. I'll do my best with my new job and work my way to get a property near Plimerton. I still have a few forms left to fill out tonight though. Fuck, I hate doing this at the last minute. Don't forget to sleep early, I said pointedly. Of course, she said, and craned her neck back. I heard enough of that scolding from you and Stan to last me a lifetime. I'm not going to sleep at 3 a.m. like I used to. 11 p.m. is my latest, that's a promise. I later found out that Emily indeed tried to keep her promise. It was an overdose. That was what my brother, Stan, had told me over the phone. I felt my stomach lurch. My throat smelled like vomit when I learned that Emily had been found dead. A bottle of sleeping pills lay beside her bed. It was no surprise how she did it. At age 26, Emily Reish would have been another young victim. The local obituary would have labeled her as part of a growing number of people who wanted to escape the fate of watching their own bodies transform into a bark. Yet, she hadn't. That was the worst part. When Stan relayed the information that our youngest sibling had died with no trace of wood in her body, I heard distinct cheering on the other end of the line. It sounded like 20 or 30 people laughing in the background. My brother told me that I should be happy that Emily had died this way. Normally, it would have taken no more than 3 hours before the corpse would resemble a mannequin. Even the morgue staff kept a 24-hour watch for any sign, any trace of bark inside or outside her skin. There was none. Emily had done it. She had beaten the impossible. At this point, I suppose I should say that I should have celebrated. My brother reminded me that Emily wouldn't have to face the towering sawmills that dwarfed every building in the city. The thought of my youngest sister being chopped into pieces and turned into furniture was whisked away. There was no longer any need to worry about that. Emily will be safe. She will be preserved. She will be the new chosen one who will be displayed among the decaying corpses within Te Papa. All my relatives cheered out at the news that one of our own had beaten the wooden curse. The city council was quite quick to proclaim the good news to the people. Not only had they given us $100,000 as a gesture of gratitude, but they set up a new exhibition at Te Papa. All as a token to Emily's death. In the beginning, Tahiri, the Maori god of the winds, waged war against his brothers. He attacked Tane, the god of the forest, and forced the god of the sea to wage war against the former. The gods of food took refuge and hid from Tahiri's onslaught. It was only the god of war, Tumatauenga, that took a stand and forced the god of winds to withdraw. Ever since that day, my grandmother had said that Wellington was Tahiri's home. It was obvious. Wellington had been considered as the windiest city in the whole country. The strong 100-kilometer gale force that could batter numerous towns in New Zealand was an everyday occurrence that everyone had gotten used to. A day within Wellington wouldn't be complete without watching an army of thick giant clouds spiraling around the city like a whirlpool. Those were Tahiri's children. The winds and the clouds were the god's army against his brothers. Tahiri commanded them to storm the seas. He ordered his children to uproot trees and scatter the crops off the ground. Whether the god of the wind was defeated by an alliance of his brothers, or not, was uncertain. It was only obvious that their presence was now gone. Wellington was no longer the windiest city of the country. It was dry. It was still, like some forgotten ruin left to decay on its own. The great fleets to clouds that had once proudly sailed the city had been replaced by an inky dark green sky. The showers of sawdust that poured out from the sawmills took over from the winds. The only trace that Tahiri and his children were ever here being faint fleeting clouds in the shape of a silent scream. There were quiet breezes. A gust came and went. Pitter-patter of rain held on for a morning. Yet, none of them shook off the dry humid weather that had devoured the city. There was no god to welcome me to the first day of Emily's exhibition, only Stan. Kia ora, Natalie, I'm glad to see that the curse hasn't taken you yet. My brother greeted me at the museum's entrance. His brown hair, which he had once tried to grow, was shortened. He combed it back, revealing a wooden crack on his forehead. He had grown bulkier since the last time I had seen him, almost stiff. Maybe it was the large brown jacket that he wore. It was May, after all, and winter was just around the corner. I could already sense, almost smell, the roasted wooden bodies who were chosen to be firewood for Wellington. It's good to see you again, Stan. I hugged him, feeling the hardness of the wood that consumed his back. How are you keeping up? How's the family? They are doing great. The kids are being babysat now. I don't think they have realized that their Auntie Emily has died. They heard about her becoming the city's newest darling, but they still don't get that people need to die to achieve that honor. I brought my wife though. She's upstairs with the rest of the family. Mom and Dad must be gushing her about their grandkids. And you? I asked. How is your condition going? You sound like I'm going to die, Nat. This is your brother you're talking to. It's all sorted out. My local carpenter told me that even though my back has been taken over, I won't have to worry for a decade or two until the curse takes me. My wife got the gall to schedule me an appointment with a cabinet maker. I swear that I married the most awesome woman in the city. He paused, placing a hand on my shoulder. I felt the tip of a finger rubbing the thick bark at the side of my neck. I realize that it's hard for you to be here, Nats. I don't think I am ready to see Emily's dead body, and the last thing I wanted is to join some sick party. I am only here because the rest of the family is here. You know me, Stan. I can't stand being the oddball. I'm not surprised. You're the most motherly type between the three of us. But that's fine. That's fine. Emily's the spoiled little princess while I'm the more, well, let's just say, extravagant, show off? I cut him off. Seriously, Stan. Did you really put on a show when you called me that day? I can't believe you. I know that you and Emily didn't get along well, but that, really? My colleagues decided to come over after work for a few beers, he said and shrugged. Right, and they started shouting, Emily will decay because that's what people do when they hear that someone has beaten the curse. He placed an arm around my shoulder and led me inside the entrance hall of the museum. The place was empty except for a headless wooden body at the center. It pointed its arm towards a stack of stairs in front of us. The figure's stump was bathed by the warm blue lights of the ceiling. The low hum of the air conditioner drowned the buzzing sound of the sawmills from outside. I could even see a faint flicker of a fire off the Wellington harbor, and the shadows of trucks near the docks. Soon, the lantern parade will be on its way. Soon, the corpses of those deemed unworthy or useless by the sawmills will be spread across the city. I can also imagine, almost hear an army of Wellingtonians marching towards the streets with axes and machetes, all ready to be hacked by their former city folk as firewood. For now, it was too quiet. It felt as if I had stepped inside an empty church dedicated to the holy decaying bodies of Wellington City. Each wall dedicated to a painting or a photograph of Wellington in its glory days. I wondered if the people in these pictures knew what the future of their city would be like. Their smiling faces and quiet laughs were different from the sighs and grindings that I saw every day. Were there any signs of Tahiri's defeat back then? Grandmother told us that the city was unaware of any warning that would bring its downhill. Maybe there was none. Maybe everything that is happening now was beyond our limit. The Maori gods have done this to us. Maybe they would fix it. My grandmother used to say, we can only hope. Where is the rest of the family? I asked as I scratched the wooden bark of my neck. They are on the 4th floor. That's where the exhibition will take place. Mom and Dad got a bit worried that you weren't here yet and asked me to fetch you knowing you'll be conflicted over Emily. You won't believe how many people turned up for this day. I don't even know most of them or how they are related to us. I only wish Grandma was here to see this, I whispered. Do you think she'd be proud? Stan asked as we climbed the wooden stairs, passing over a series of old photos of the Te Papa Museum in its glory days. She would still be rooted in her old home at Plimerton. She had said that she was in self-exile. I like to think that Grandma would make an exception, I said. Emily was always her favorite. She used to give her the first taste of cookies since she was the only one small enough to sit on her lap. I remember how you and I used to fight for that position. We even made numerous alliances to get Emily off Grandma's special list. I smirked, catching glimpses of dark silhouettes of the sawmills from a window. I bet she wasn't planning to die that night, Stan said as he chipped off a piece of bark from his head. Emily was a klutz. I bet she must have taken one pill too many. I told her to stop that, I said. You can't really blame all of it on yourself, Nat. It's Emily's fault for drinking all those energy drinks nonstop during university. We kept warning her that it would affect her sleeping pattern, but that girl was too stubborn and pretentious to listen. Just because she was pretty doesn't mean she had common sense. You remember how she caught me taking away her valuable caffeine drinks? I forced a smile. Emil ranted a whole night saying how you were the worst brother ever. She even avoided me for a whole month, he chuckled. I ruined that by popping by at her place one night. Oh, that girl wasn't keen to see me. And now Emily is dead. I clenched my fist.
Stan, I was with her a few days before she passed away.
If I had known something was wrong or if she told me about her sleeping problems, I could have. There was nothing we could do. We could, I said. I was there. Natalie, my brother gripped my arm. Please. Enough. You're not the only one who is grieving. I may not look like it, but I miss Emily as well. We used to hate each other's guts. I swear our brother-sister rivalry was a bloody comedy sketch, but now that she's gone, I'm not even sure what to do. Stan, he continued, eyes narrowed. Did you want to see her being turned into timber, Natalie? I can still remember how men in white uniforms took our grandmother's wooden body and turned her into a piece of chair. I still have nightmares thinking about how her body was hacked by a buzz saw. Seriously, Nat, who would want a grave like that? No one. Be happy, Nat, please. It's too late for us already. We will face those damn sawmills one day, but Emily, she will be here as long as time passes. She will be a model, a light for everyone who faces the chainsaws. I smiled a little. It was ironic, almost a sick parody that my advice to Emily in becoming a model rather than a receptionist came true. Her beautiful young body would be displayed for all people to see. I imagined the public gawking with wide eyes as they approached her. It was no surprise. Those who had achieved the state of natural death were people either in their 70s or late 80s. It was rare, almost unheard of, for someone so young to defeat the curse of a wooden death. The youngest person before Emily was a 40-year-old man who was found drowned off the coast of Red Rocks. Since then, it had been elderlies. It was clear that the city folk were baffled. Prior to the exhibition, the city council declared that Emily's body was a rank 1 relic. Rather than have her body slowly decay, like most of the inhabitants of the museum, she would be perfectly preserved. She will be a still frame. Generations into the future, people will ask the museum staff who she was. How had she done it? What did she eat? What was her secret? I'll be pissed if the local news reports a huge sale in sleeping pills. If that happens, I'm going to whoever made the report and telling them that just because my sister had defeated the curse, doesn't mean that people know everything about her. It's already bad enough that our youngest sister will permanently reside within the wooden walls of this museum. When I was a young girl, I played a game called headhunting. The rules were simple. For every visit to the museum, my classmates and I aimed to count as many heads that we could find. It was an easy game since there were countless faces that jutted off from each stack of timber. We gave 1 point for the heads with blank expressions, 2 points went for the faces who were sad or afraid, and, finally, a total of 3 points for those with a smile, a frozen semblance of laughter etched in their wooden faces. It was a fun game. Most children and some of my teachers were happy to sacrifice an hour for a few rounds of headhunting. My biggest record was a 206. I was slightly tempted to try and beat the number as Stan and I made our way upwards. The faces that I had counted when I was 14 were mostly gone. That was the beauty of the headhunting. Every year, 100 or 2 of these wooden boards were replaced. It was always fun darting around the tall steep walls of the museum to find new faces that hadn't been there before. The constant smell of decay and the sight of peeling flesh from old bodies that suffocated the second and third floors was nowhere near the thrill of finding a new face. I wished I had that same excitement when Stan and I reached the museum's 4th floor. Boarded shut by thick wooden panels, the top floor of the museum was the beating heart of Te Papa. It was the holiest of holy places for Wellington City, a site where a selected few were granted the right to be a still image forever. Though it wasn't exactly closed to the public, a normal person must pay a hefty $300 ticket, and even that was limited for only 3 hours. I had been there once as part of my work with the city council. It was a short visit. I think it was only half an hour at most, but even then, I could still picture myself basking under a soft white and yellow glow from the ceiling. The floor was white. A scent of sweet incense lifted me off my feet. Tena koto, tena koto, tena koto katoa. Greeting to the proud families of Wellington's newest treasure. Tena rawa atako. The pot-bellied figure of Councillor Jonathan Whale stood on top of a makeshift stage. A giant statue of Tahiri, the god of the wind, stood silently behind him. The councillor welcomed an army of wooden bodies below him. It was a mangled contortion of wood and flesh that ruined the serenity of the 4th floor. Branches sprouted from necks. Whole legs were entombed by soft carpets of algae. The army cheered. They shouted my sister's name over and over, raising their arms and craning their heads back. I rubbed the hardened part of my neck. Nails tried to claw the bark from my flesh. I felt sick. The thought that I would join this army was unimaginable. I wanted to get out of the building at that very moment. I didn't want to see the perverted sight in front of me. I didn't want to listen to it cracking and turning. My grandmother was right. Emily was right. There was no point staying in a city that was a shadow of itself. I didn't want to see my boss running his bony fingers over a large curtain-covered glass case beside him. He caressed it. He lifted the bottom part a few centimeters up before letting go. Each moment, he described the beauty of Emily Reish. He told everyone that she was a prize worth dying for, how her flesh was serene, soft. You want to touch her hair, to rub her lips. You wish to whisper to her ear that she is beautiful. Why? The councillor shouted. His bloated belly hugged the case as the crowd cheered. This is our city's newest treasure, our Puipoyaki, Emily Reish, Tena Rawa Ado Ko. Thank you very much. He paused. His beady eyes scanned the room before he rubbed his head. He lowered his voice. And, no, I almost forgot. We cannot celebrate the Rirahua, the beauty of our beloved daughter without thanking the parents, the whānau, that gave her to us. Now my haere mai. Stan grabbed my arm at this point as Mom and Dad walked up to the stage. Their bodies were woody and stiff. Their heads were the only part themselves untouched by the curse. Yet, they smiled. Their faces were covered with tears knowing their wish, their hope that one of us would defeat the curse had come true. Let's go, Natalie, Stan said, walking forward. His breath was ragged. His eyes were glued to the glass case upon the stage. Stan became a man possessed. I could tell that he badly see what was behind the curtain. He didn't mind if he walked straight through the army, bumping, crashing, and bruising both of us against the hard surface of our wooden family. I wanted to tell him to stop. I wanted to beg him to slow down. He was hurting me. There was no need to rush. There was time. The city council had informed us that Emily's immediate family would have unlimited free access to the 4th floor as gratitude. I wanted to protest, but all I could muster were gasps. The back of my neck became flustered, almost hot. In the back of my mind, a little voice told me to celebrate. It told me that I could once again see my dear sister, that the 3 of us will be united. And as Stan and I reached the front, wooden hands pushed us forward. I fell on my knees only to look up at the beautiful, Nude corpse of my youngest sister. I opened my mouth. A uniform gasp of all my relatives conquered whatever words I mustered. She is beautiful, declared the voice in my head. Emily Reish is beautiful, I repeated, my face now fully infected by the wide, toothy smile of everyone around. October 9th. I invited my old friends over for the first time in what seems like forever. We'd get together like this often throughout high school, when we comparatively didn't have much to worry about other than the typical naiveties we all wore on our sleeves. It's not like today. All four of us have jobs, and after said jobs we typically don't feel like doing much. Spout some daily nonsense in the group chat, rant about our bosses, our day-to-day interactions are almost always virtualized. Not that I'm complaining, it seems like most friend groups slowly dissipate after the chains that bind them together, also known as school, finally release. I'm actually very thankful to have such a strong relationship with these guys, not that I could ever say that to them directly. They'd start cracking jokes without so much as a second of hesitation, I guarantee it. What a bunch of assholes. The best I can do is write it here and keep it private forever. Anyway, they're all gonna stay over for the weekend, or so they say. The only other time we did this, I'm pretty sure Jesse crashed on my couch for like a week. Weirdly enough, I didn't actually mind. When you're stuck in a house all by yourself most of the time, having company that doesn't consist of the repetitive, synthetic noises on TV feels rather nice. Either way, I'm prepared for a long sleepover. Sleepover? That word feels strange to use in this scenario, especially considering we're no longer a group of juveniles. I'll just call it a stayover. I don't know if that's a pre-existing word or if it has another meaning, but that's what I'm calling it. Here's to a good stayover with my asshole friends. October 10th. It took everyone a while to get here on account of the snow. Yeah, snow. In October. The weather has been so strange this year. Typically we don't see this hellish subservient of winter until December, mid-November at the absolute earliest. But that's just in my area. I guess it would be different for people who live in another state. I guess in the long run it's not that strange, just unique to us personally. The weather was one of the first topics of discussion when they all arrived in Matt's car, paired with some playful bickering between Spencer and Jesse about some band, and which of their favorite albums was better than the other. At least I'm pretty sure they were talking about the same artist. I can't be too sure since they never said any names I recognized. They're a couple of weirdos. A perfect match. Matt and I just idly sat by, talking about the latest movie releases. We tossed around the idea of watching one later in the night, which is something him and I would often do back in the days of our adolescence. We eventually settled on doing just that, but I should have known that the two of us were the only ones who'd actually pay the entertainment any mind. Matt and I are big fans of cheesy horror films, the good and the bad alike, so we had no problem giving it our attention for the next hour and a half. Jesse, on the other hand, seemingly had his entire upper body submerged into his laptop, presumably working on that damn novel he's always talking about but never letting me read. You'd think he'd want some form of feedback for something he's put so much work and time into, but no. He's one cocky motherfucker. He always says I can read it when it's published. My theory is that he's working on something steamy and he's too embarrassed to let me see. Spencer, on the other hand, was entirely entranced by some portable video game console he brought with him. It must be new, because it's not one I recognized when I saw it. His dedication to these kinds of things is actually sort of frightening. One time, during his rabid fixation on some recently released RPG, he sent me a screenshot at the crack of dawn of some high-tier weapon he'd acquired. This would have been fine on its own. The concerning part is that I saw him online before I went to bed the previous night, not to mention he had worked that morning. What a madman. After the movie was finished, Matt and I thought it would be amusing to bombard the other two with questions about the film we just saw. He asked Jesse to give us his expert critical assessment of the feature that he'd obviously paid no mind to. To Jesse's very little credit, he gave it an attempt, albeit half-heartedly. Spencer didn't even try, he just brushed it off with his archetypal, "I'll be honest, I didn't pay any attention." It was a fun day, something I seldom experience in my current work-driven climate. I sincerely hope we can do this more often. October 11th, day 2 of our misadventures. It was an overall enjoyable one, but it came with an odd incident. I'm questioning whether or not it's even worth writing down, considering I have no idea what happened or if it was anything serious. It was when the three of us were downstairs in the kitchen earlier this afternoon. I'm pretty sure Matt was drawing in his sketchbook and Spencer was debating with Jesse about God knows what. I was slaving away at the stove, making something for the four of us to eat. Admittedly, the heat felt pretty soothing, as it was unreasonably cold today. We were in the middle of a snowstorm, which struck me as odd considering I never saw anything on my phone about that. Usually we get alerts about that sort of thing before it happens, but this time it just sort of came. I didn't mind much, as long as the power stayed on. But as I reached into the cabinet above me to pull out a plate to use, I felt everything around me suddenly shake. The ground beneath me seemed to erupt with movement without even a moment of warning. Everyone went silent, and the abruptness of this earthly disturbance caused me to drop my plate and nearly stumble over. Thankfully, I caught myself on the counter. The hard plastic disc bounced off the ground and eventually fell into a flat state of equilibrium. As I went to turn and face my friends, it happened again, so once more I took hold of the firm marble surface and braced myself. I've never experienced an earthquake before, so I reasoned to myself that what I was currently going through was just that. The tremors came and went in a seemingly rhythmic fashion, happening intermittently over the course of a few minutes. Within that time frame, they slowly weakened and eventually stopped in their entirety. I turned my head and noticed that the weather had apparently cleared. Once it was over, I heard Jesse and Spencer continue their conversation as if nothing had just happened, as if the silence during the event never existed. I worriedly asked if everyone was okay, but they didn't seem to know what I was talking about. Even Matt, who is always the voice of reason in our discordant posse, seemed to react incredulously to my question. I asked if anyone else had felt what I'd just felt, but they all said no. Matt said it looked to him like I'd simply lost my footing and dropped the plate I was carrying. Spencer made a facetious threat and said that I'd better not drop his plate too. Jesse simply asked if I was okay. I really was the only one who felt that awful trembling. Even now, I'm having a bit of trouble reasoning with myself as to what that could have been. A hallucination seems unlikely, seeing as that's something I've never experienced before. An earthquake also doesn't make sense, since I'm apparently the only one who could feel it. I guess the most likely explanation is that I'd simply imagined it. I suppose I can rest assured knowing that it probably wasn't real. I opted to let myself forget about the strange occurrence so that I could enjoy the rest of the day with my friends, but now that the other three are asleep, I can't help but think about it again. I know I shouldn't dwell on it, so I decided to write down my thoughts here. That way I can have some form of closure. Tomorrow's the last day my friends are supposed to be here, and I'm determined to enjoy my time with them. October 12th. Well, looks like my stayover has been unforeseeably lengthened by Mother Nature. Matt planned on taking everyone home later in the evening, but after taking a look outside, he informed me that the roads, let alone my driveway, were too icy to even think about driving. After the revelation that they'd have to spend another night at my place, all three of them tossed around a salad of ideas related to passing the time. They all suggested something rather typical of themselves. Spencer said we should hold a fighting game tournament, despite him being the only one who actively plays. Matt was dead set on us binge watching some cheesy sci-fi show he was into that the rest of us had never seen. Jesse, being the poet among us, wanted to listen to a catalog of rock albums he had on his phone. It seemed there was no way to please everyone. What ended up happening was a strange conglomerate of the proposed ideas. I heroically volunteered to have my ass floored by Spencer and his favorite fighter, while Jesse played some pretentious prog rock in the background of my struggles. Matt took the opportunity to talk our ears off about the show he so desperately wanted us all to watch. But, I'm gonna be honest, I wasn't really convinced. Sorry Matt, I'll stick with the weird cheesy horror movies. We can at least have that in common. Perhaps one day I'll check out the subject of your fanatical ravings, but for now, I think I need to focus on not letting Spencer wipe the floor with me next time we play that stupid game. I don't care how many hundreds of hours you've put in, I'm coming for you and I'm coming for you hard. October 13th. It happened again. My hallucination, daydream, whatever it was, it happened again. But it was so much worse this time. Everything was in favor of this being a normal day, just like yesterday, but I could feel that something was off. Maybe it was the intemperate chillness of the air. It felt so much colder today than the day before, but I was the only one who seemed to mind it. Matt, Spencer and Jesse all seemed pretty anxious to get home, so maybe it didn't even register to them. They all had jobs they needed to get back to, some sooner than others, so they were discussing braving the hostile patches of slick road in Matt's worn-out old car. Matt insisted he could get everyone home safely, and Jesse playfully retorted with the idea that none of them would survive the trip. Spencer then claimed he'd be the sole survivor of the motorized atrocity. The living room was lively that morning, but I felt a lingering sense of minor dejection that my friends would be leaving after such an enjoyable weekend. I went over to the window so I could look at Matt's rustic, beaten-up ride. I was morbidly curious to see if Jesse's claims of incoming mortality held any weight. But I couldn't see much of his car. Instead I was met with a harsh blizzard. My first instinct was to ask why in God's name they'd make the drive in such nasty conditions, but then a realization hit me, and my heart sank as if it had just rolled out of bed. No one paid any notice to the snowstorm today, and thinking back on it, no one did on Saturday either. When I imagined that weird earthquake, I felt my breathing suddenly hasten in pace as my face grew feverishly hot. Somehow, I knew it was going to happen again. The room fell into silence, and before I had the chance to brace myself, all stillness suddenly shot into that of an abrasive quake. I grabbed onto the windowsill and forced my palms down as hard as I could. My breathing became unhinged, fleeing my lungs and exiting my windpipe beyond my control. This only got worse as I looked outside the window. Outside, obscured by the thick, impairing fog, I saw a silhouette of something. Something large. It appeared as a massive, grotesque humanoid figure. It must have been taller than the most towering building in my city. I could only see its slender, pasty legs, and its wormy, disgusting fingertips piercing their way into my visibility. I fearfully watched as it intently strode forward. Every step it took resulted in another shaky episode. It seemed to push the earth itself downward with every step. I didn't know what to do. I had no idea what I was seeing. All I knew is that I dared not to make a single sound as I watched this colossal creature inch further and further away from my sight. It only took a few minutes, but that few minutes could not have possibly been stretched out any further. The oppressive snow quickly subsided, which I reasoned meant it was over. The room suddenly lit up with the sounds of casual conversation, which both relieved and petrified me. Once again, I was the only one who witnessed any of what just happened. I didn't know how to bring any of it up to them. I didn't want them to make light of this. There's no way they'd take me seriously. I opted to stay silent, despite the fear and panic I felt. In the end, it only happened to me. There's no way it could have been real. Later, around sunset, I watched as my friends drove off, back to their normal lives. Now I'm stuck at home with these horrible images burned into my mind. I can't stop thinking about it. I'm having trouble getting to sleep, let alone thinking straight. Writing this down has been indescribably hard. My thoughts are far too scrambled. I need to compose myself and come back to this tomorrow. October 14th. I had an entire night and day to think about what happened yesterday. I decided to just tell my friends what I saw. I shot a long-winded message in our group chat. Responses were pretty much what I'd expected. I'd hoped in vain that they'd at least humor me on this. I can't say I blame them. It not only sounds ludicrous, but we're not a serious group of people by nature. I probably wouldn't take it seriously either, but I can't say that logical line of thought makes me feel any less isolated at the moment. I hope I'm not losing my mind. I don't know anything about the psychology of this sort of thing, but I know most people would label me as insane if I were to relay to them anything I've been through in the past few days. I'm imagining things. There's no way around that. Is that enough for someone to be clinically insane? There's a million anxiety-inducing thoughts swimming around in my mind, and they won't stop. It's like a CD on repeat, only I can't turn it off. How many times is this going to happen? How long am I going to be like this? Will this affect me my whole life? Will I just have to learn to ignore it and try to live as normally as I can? Am I able to afford therapy? Is there medication that can help me? Is there anyone out there who saw the same shit I did? I haven't been able to get stuff like this out of my head all day. I fear what'll happen if I allow my thoughts to become incoherent. I want to avoid that at all costs. I feel perfectly sane. I have to stay that way. I feel like keeping tabs on myself is a good way to do that. I'll just keep writing down my thoughts like I've done for years. October 15th. That thing came back. It fucking came back. I saw it up close, and it was too goddamn vivid to be fake. But it has to be. I was upstairs, sitting on my bed. It was another unnaturally cold day, so I knew I was bound to see something. It's because of that thought that I shut myself up here. I waited for hours upon hours, and nothing happened. After a while, I started to feel relieved. I thought that maybe these mountainous specters had finally left me alone, that I'd never see them again. Christ, I wish I would have been right. I stood up from my bed, finally ready to leave my self-imposed containment, and right at that moment, I felt the entire house reverberate. I stumbled in place and grabbed onto my bed frame for stability, spinning my head in the direction of my bedroom's only window. Of course, another whiteout. I clenched my teeth and shut my eyes as hard as the muscles in my face would allow me to. I just wanted it to be over. That's when I noticed it felt different this time. What I perceived to be the creature's footsteps felt as if they were coming closer. The more intense the trembles became, the more frantic my breath and heart rate got in response. It finally came down to a last, irregularly paced thud outside my house. My breathing turned ragged and loud. I couldn't control it at that point. I was panicking. I couldn't make out why I would imagine this ethereal nightmare stopping outside my house. I forced myself to open my eyes and cautiously turned my head to my window once more. It was an eye. An enormous, human-like, fixating eye. It looked directly at me, or so it seemed. Its iris was milky and gray, outlined with a putrid black coloration. Its pupil had black flares seemingly trying to escape the center. It was completely still. I couldn't perceive any movement from it whatsoever. The creature was deathly silent, as was I, despite my panic. It seemed the power to my house was knocked out while I was hiding behind my eyelids. I sat in almost complete darkness, staring this horrid thing down. The only light came from outside, where it was. I felt like I was dreaming, but at the same time I felt like I was going to faint. I don't know how long it took the damn thing to move on, but it eventually did. I waited to move again until I could no longer feel its monstrous footsteps. My power still hasn't come back on. I must be imagining that too. It doesn't make sense to me. How could any of this actually be happening? I'm terrified of what could be coming next. My encounters with this thing keep getting more and more fucked up. I need to sleep, but I can't. It's getting harder and harder to think. Nothing makes sense. Someone, please help me understand. October 16th. I haven't been able to contact any of my friends all day. Somehow my service isn't working. I haven't slept for 3 days, so I'm sure this is just part of another hallucination of mine. I refuse to believe in any of it. I need to sleep. Sleep will help. October 17th. I saw 3 of them today. When I woke up and felt how cold the air was, I already knew what I was in for. I'm repulsed to admit it, but when I saw 3 of those things casually wander in and out of sight, it didn't have a very strong effect on me. Maybe it's because I'd finally collapsed from exhaustion yesterday, so emotion didn't overwhelm me so easily. I heard something fall over in the attic when they passed by, so after I'm finished writing this, I'm gonna go see what it was. My power still hasn't come back on, and I still don't seem to have any service, which leads me to believe I've gone completely off the deep end. I don't know if anything I'm seeing or doing is real anymore. I can only hope that my perceived actions are still my own. I think I'm sitting at home, writing about my descent into madness in my journal, but I could very well be in a ward right now. I'm having more trouble remembering very simple things. I can't remember the name of the band Jesse and Spencer were arguing about when they first came here. I can't remember the name of the movie Matt and I watched while the other 2 dicked off. I can't remember what Jesse's book was called, or what game I played with Spencer that he kicked my ass at. Why are all of these simple, easy things so hard to recall? I don't get it. Is this part of the whole losing your mind process? I'm starting to feel hysterical. I think I should just go to the attic. I need to stop festering in these thoughts. It just makes me feel worse. October 18th. Everything hurts right now. My heart feels like it's going to burst, and tears haven't stopped streaming down my face since last night. I went up to the attic, like I said, and found something I sincerely wish I hadn't. It's strenuous even attempting to calm myself down after what I saw. It hurts so damn much. I'm trying to find the words to use, but I just can't. It's too much. After making it up there, I saw something had fallen from its place on the shelf. I picked it up to inspect it, and it was something I didn't recognize as mine. It was a simple cardboard box, with tape splayed in the center to deter entry. Written across every surface, in large, bold, black lettering, read, "Do not open." I was confused as to what this was doing in my house. Peculiarly enough, the handwriting on it was actually mine. I brought it downstairs shortly after recognizing that detail. I sat on the idea of opening it for a few hours. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't recall ever putting this strange box in the attic, let alone writing a warning on it. But I guess that shouldn't have been too big of a shock. I was having trouble remembering a lot of things. Simple things that I was ashamed to have forgotten so easily. It makes sense that I'd forget doing something like this too. It could have been years old. After all, I eventually settled on just opening the thing. I reasoned to myself that I should do so, based solely on the slim chance there would be something in there that could help me understand what was going on. I got my wish. Inside that damn thing were 3 items, all of which I recognized. One was an old handheld video game console that was released when I was still in high school. I would spend my lunch periods completely immersed inside this thing, ignoring pretty much all of my classmates. Another was a sketchbook, also from high school. I don't know why I ever stopped drawing. I had so much fun with it at the time. It's probably one of the most enjoyable ways to express yourself, whether you're good or bad at it. The last one was an unfinished novel that I started working on after I graduated. I submitted it for publication more times than I can remember, but nothing ever came from it. I must have rewritten and reworked this story tens of times before eventually giving up. I opened it up again and read a portion of my last abandoned draft. I love these old characters to death. I had a lot planned for the 3 of you. It's a shame it never worked out before all of this started. That's when the tears first came to greet my face. I haven't been able to stop them since, even as I'm writing this. I looked back at the entries I wrote since the 3 of my friends came over. No wonder I couldn't remember any of the stuff pertaining to them. I never made names for those things to begin with. I was trying so hard to cling to the vestiges of a normal life that I deluded myself into thinking my friends were real. I somehow forgot about the things outside, along with the silence and cold they brought with them. They are a reality, and it's been that way for a long time. How did I forget? How could I forget? I really did lose my mind. I'm going to remove the last 9 days of my life from this journal, along with this one. I need to. I can't ever be reminded of this pain again. Once this entry is over, I'm ripping these pages out and starting new entries from scratch. I'm tearing them to shreds and I'm tossing them all outside. As much as this hurts, it's what I need to do. Goodbye, you guys. October 19th. I invited some old friends over yesterday. It seems like forever since I last saw them. The 3 of us used to hang out like this all the time back in high school, when things were a lot simpler. Nowadays it's just constant work and back pains. The world sucks, but with those 3 around, it sucks a lot less. They're truly my best friends in the world, not that I can tell them that. They'd probably make fun of me. What a bunch of assholes.